I never thought Benny would actually call my bluff. That's the thing about being with someone for 8 years. You think you know exactly how they'll react to everything. I thought I knew him inside and out, every expression, every defensive move, every way he'd try to win me back when I got fed up with his behavior. Turns out I didn't know him at all. I'm Kalia, and I'm 34 years old, sitting in my studio apartment at midnight writing this because I can't sleep. Again. It's been 4 months since Benny moved out, and I'm still trying to figure out how I went from being the one with all the power in our relationship to being the one begging him to come back. Let me start from the beginning, because maybe if I tell this story right, it'll make sense to someone. Maybe it'll even start making sense to me. Benny and I met when I was 26 and working as a marketing coordinator for a small nonprofit that helped veterans transition back to civilian life. He was one of our success stories, a former Marine who'd started his own landscaping business after struggling for a couple years post-deployment. He came to speak at one of our donor events, and I was immediately drawn to how calm and grounded he seemed. There was something about the way he talked about finding purpose in creating beautiful outdoor spaces that made me want to know more about him. We started dating slowly. Benny wasn't one of those guys who swept you off your feet with grand gestures or dramatic declarations of love. He was steady, reliable, the kind of person who showed up when he said he would and remembered the little things you mentioned in passing. He'd bring me soup when I was sick, help me move furniture without being asked, listen to me complain about work drama without trying to fix everything immediately. For the first few years, it was exactly what I needed. I'd dated plenty of men who were all flash and no substance, guys who could charm you on a first date but couldn't sustain a real relationship. Benny was different. He was building something real with his business, working long hours but always making time for me. He talked about wanting a family someday, about buying a house with a big yard where kids could run around. But somewhere around year 4, things started to shift. His business really took off. He landed a few big commercial contracts and suddenly had more work than he could handle. That meant longer hours, weekend jobs, coming home exhausted and covered in dirt. I understood that he was working hard for our future, but it also meant I was spending a lot of evenings alone. Looking back, I think this was when my insecurities really started to take hold. I began comparing our relationship to other couples who seemed to have more time together, more romantic gestures, more Instagram-worthy moments. My friend Maya was dating this guy who worked in tech and had a flexible schedule. He could take long lunches with her, plan surprise weekend trips, be available for every social event. I started resenting that Benny couldn't do the same things. The rational part of my brain knew it wasn't fair to compare our situation to others. Maya's boyfriend had a corporate job with set hours and generous vacation time. Benny was building something from scratch, and that required a different kind of sacrifice. But the emotional part of me, the part that felt lonely and neglected, didn't care about rational explanations. I wanted what I wanted, and I wanted it now. I started keeping mental scorecards of his failures. Every canceled dinner became evidence that I wasn't important to him. Every time he fell asleep on the couch, instead of coming to bed with me, became proof that he was choosing work over our intimacy. Every phone call he had to take during our time together felt like a personal rejection. The worst part was that I began to interpret everything through this lens of neglect. When Benny would bring me flowers after a particularly long week, instead of seeing it as a sweet gesture, I'd think, he only does this when he feels guilty about working too much. When he'd suggest, we stay in and order takeout instead of going out to dinner, I'd see it as laziness rather than exhaustion. I started testing him in little ways that I convinced myself were reasonable. I'd mention events casually and see if he'd remember to put them in his calendar. I'd suggest date nights on days when I knew he usually had work obligations, just to see if he'd choose me. When he inevitably had to prioritize work, I'd feel vindicated in my belief that I wasn't important to him. The manipulation started small and escalated gradually. I'd get quiet and withdrawn when he had to work late, forcing him to coax me out of my mood before he could focus on anything else. I'd make comments about how lucky other women were to have partners who made time for them. I'd bring up friends whose relationships seemed more balanced, not so subtly suggesting that maybe their boyfriends loved them more than Benny loved me. At some point, I realized I had developed a twisted kind of power in our relationship. Benny was so conflict-averse and so committed to making me happy that I could essentially control his behavior through my emotional reactions. If I got upset enough about something, he'd move mountains to fix it, even if it meant sacrificing his own needs or professional obligations. This realization should have horrified me, but instead, it felt like validation. Finally, I thought, he was showing me that I mattered. When he turned down work to spend time with me, when he rearranged his schedule around my social events, when he chose our relationship over a business opportunity, I felt like I was winning some invisible competition for his attention. But winning felt hollow because I could see what it was costing him. Benny started looking tired all the time, not just physically but emotionally drained. He'd agree to my demands with this resigned expression, like he was calculating how much of himself he could afford to give away before there was nothing left. The spontaneous joy he used to find in his work began to fade as it became something he had to constantly defend and justify. That's when I started picking fights about stupid things. If he forgot to text me back during the day, I'd accuse him of not prioritizing our relationship. If he fell asleep during a movie we were watching together, I'd get upset about him not spending quality time with me. If he wanted to grab drinks with his crew after a particularly tough job, I'd make him feel guilty about choosing his friends over me. The crazy thing is, I knew I was being unreasonable even as I was doing it. But I felt like I was losing him to his work, and I didn't know how else to get his attention. The sweet, patient man I'd fallen in love with was still there, but he was buried under layers of exhaustion and stress. And instead of being understanding about that, I made it worse by adding relationship drama to everything else he was dealing with. Benny never fought back, not really. He'd apologize even when he hadn't done anything wrong, promise to do better, try to make plans with me that would inevitably get interrupted by work emergencies. I could see him getting more and more worn down, but instead of backing off, I doubled down. I convinced myself that if I just pushed hard enough, he'd realize that I should be his top priority and start acting like it. The threats started small. If you cancel on me again, I'm going to start making my own plans without you. If you can't make time for this relationship, maybe I should find someone who can. I never meant them seriously. They were just my way of trying to shock him into paying more attention to me. And for a while, they worked. He'd rearrange his schedule, turn down jobs, do whatever it took to prove that I mattered to him, but I could see it was costing him. His business partner, Randy, started giving me cold looks when I'd show up at job sites to drag Benny away for lunch dates. Some of Benny's biggest clients began working with other companies because he'd had to cancel or reschedule so many times. His stress levels went through the roof, and instead of being sympathetic, I was resentful that his stress was affecting our relationship. The night everything fell apart was a Friday in September. Benny had promised we'd go to my friend Zoe's birthday party, but at the last minute, he got a call about a sprinkler system malfunction at one of his commercial properties. It was the kind of emergency that could cost him the contract if he didn't handle it immediately. But I was so tired of being disappointed that I didn't care about the practical realities. "You always do this," I told him as he changed out of the nice shirt he'd put on for the party. "You promise me something, and then work comes up and suddenly I don't matter anymore." "Kalia, you know that's not true," he said, and I could hear how tired he was. Not just physically tired, but emotionally exhausted. "This is an emergency. The client's entire irrigation system is flooded. If I don't fix this tonight, they're going to fire me." "So let them fire you," I shot back. "You have plenty of other clients. You don't need this one job." He stared at me like I'd slapped him. "That's not how running a business works. You can't just decide that one client doesn't matter because it's inconvenient. But you can decide that your girlfriend doesn't matter. I'm not deciding that. I'm dealing with a work crisis. There's a difference." But I was past the point of being reasonable. I'd been looking forward to this party for weeks, had bought a new dress, made plans to introduce Benny to some of my college friends who were visiting from out of state. The disappointment felt huge and personal, like he was choosing work over me deliberately just to hurt me. "I am so sick of this," I said, and I could hear my voice getting shrill. I'm sick of coming second to every single job that comes up. I'm sick of making plans that don't mean anything because you'll just cancel them whenever something more important comes along. It's not more important, Benny said quietly. It's just urgent. There's a difference. Is there? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like everything in your life is more important than I am. He was putting on his work boots, getting ready to leave, and something about the resigned way he was moving made me even angrier. Like this was just another problem he had to deal with, another item on his endless to-do list. Maybe I should just save us both the trouble, I said. Maybe I should find someone who actually wants to be in a relationship with me, instead of someone who sees me as an obligation. Benny stopped tying his boots and looked up at me. What's that supposed to mean? It means maybe we should just end this. You're obviously happier when you're working, and I'm obviously happier when I'm not waiting around for someone who's never going to make me a priority. I expected him to panic. I expected him to drop everything and beg me not to leave, to promise that he'd figure out a way to balance work and our relationship better. I expected him to choose me finally, definitively. Instead, he finished tying his boots and stood up. Maybe you're right, he said. The words hit me like ice water. What? Maybe we want different things. Maybe this isn't working. Are you serious right now? You just said you wanted to end things. I'm agreeing with you. I didn't mean it. I was just upset about the party. But Benny was already grabbing his keys and his work jacket. I have to go deal with this emergency. We can talk when I get back. Benny, wait. No, Kalia, you said what you said. Maybe it's time we both stopped pretending this is working when it clearly isn't. He left, and I stood in our living room feeling like the ground had disappeared from under my feet. In all the times I'd threatened to leave, he'd never once agreed with me. He'd never once suggested that maybe I was right, that maybe we weren't compatible. I spent the next 3 hours alternating between fury and panic. How dare he just walk out in the middle of a fight? How dare he agree with me when I was obviously just venting my frustration? But also, what if he meant it? What if he really thought we should break up? When he came home around midnight, dirty and exhausted, I was waiting for him with an apology prepared. I was ready to admit that I'd been unreasonable, that I understood he'd had a work emergency, that I was sorry for threatening to leave. But the man who walked through our door wasn't the same one who'd left. Something in his face had changed. He looked at me with this expression I'd never seen before, not angry, not hurt, just finished. "We need to talk," he said. "I know, I'm sorry, I was just disappointed about the party and I took it out on you." I didn't mean what I said about ending things. "But you did mean it," he said, sitting down across from me. "Maybe not about tonight specifically, but you meant it. You've been unhappy for months, Kalia, we both have. That doesn't mean we should break up, it means we should work on things." "Work on what, exactly? You want me to put you first in everything, and I can't do that right now. Not when I'm trying to build something that will support us in the long run. And you can't accept that this is a temporary situation, that the crazy hours won't last forever." But they have lasted forever. It's been 2 years of this, Benny. 2 years of canceled plans and interrupted dinners and me feeling like I'm competing with your job for your attention. "And maybe that's not fair to either of us," he said. "Maybe you deserve someone who's in a place where they can give you the attention you need. And maybe I deserve someone who understands that building a business requires sacrifice." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "So that's it, you're just giving up." "I'm not giving up. I'm accepting reality. We want different things right now." "You want a boyfriend who's available whenever you need him, and I can't be that person. Not right now." "So we wait. We work through it. That's what people in relationships do." "But you don't want to wait, Kalia. You've made that clear. You've told me a dozen times that if I can't prioritize you right now, today, then maybe we shouldn't be together." "So maybe we shouldn't." The worst part was how calm he was. There was no anger, no emotion, just this terrible matter-of-fact acceptance that our 8-year relationship was over. I started crying, begging him to reconsider, promising I'd be more patient and understanding. But he just looked sad and tired. "I think I should stay at Randy's place for a while," he said. "Give us both some space to figure out what we want." "I know what I want you." "No, you want a version of me that doesn't exist right now." You want the guy who can drop everything to go to parties and take spontaneous trips and be available whenever you're feeling neglected. That guy doesn't exist anymore, and I don't know when he'll exist again. He packed a bag that night and left, just like that. 8 years, and he walked out like it was the most reasonable thing in the world. The next few weeks were a nightmare. I kept expecting him to come back, to miss me enough to try to work things out. Instead, he seemed to settle into his new life with disturbing ease. He was staying at Randy's house, throwing himself even deeper into work, picking up jobs on weekends that he used to keep free for us. When I'd text him, his responses were polite but distant. When I'd call, he'd answer if he wasn't working, but our conversations felt stilted and formal. It was like we were acquaintances catching up, not two people who'd shared a life together for nearly a decade. I tried everything to get him back. I showed up at job sites with lunch, trying to remind him of how thoughtful I could be. I sent him long emails explaining how I'd changed, how I understood now that I'd been unfair and demanding. I even went to his mom's house, hoping she'd talk some sense into him, but she just looked at me with this pitying expression and said she thought some time apart might be good for both of us. The worst part was seeing how much better he looked. When we'd meet for coffee to discuss dividing up our belongings, he seemed rested and peaceful in a way he hadn't in months. His business was doing better than ever. Without me constantly pulling him away from work, he'd been able to focus completely on growing his client base and improving his services. "You look good," I told him during one of these meetings, hoping he'd say the same about me. Instead, he just nodded and said, "I've been sleeping better." That's when it hit me that I'd been stressing him out for months, maybe years. All those fights about attention and priorities hadn't just been hard on me, they'd been hard on him too. But instead of feeling guilty, I felt angry. If our relationship was stressing him out so much, why hadn't he told me? Why had he let me be the bad guy, the demanding girlfriend, when he could have just been honest about what he needed? The realization that Benny was happier without me was devastating. Not just because I missed him, but because it forced me to confront some uncomfortable truths about myself. I'd spent so much time focusing on what I wasn't getting from our relationship that I'd lost sight of what I was giving, or not giving. I'd wanted Benny to prioritize me over his work, but I'd never prioritized his dreams and goals. I'd demanded his attention and time without considering what he needed from me. I'd made our relationship feel like another obligation instead of a source of support and joy. Now, 4 months later, I'm trying to rebuild my life and figure out who I am when I'm not fighting for someone's attention. I've started therapy, which is helping me understand why I felt so threatened by Benny's ambition instead of proud of it. I'm working on becoming the kind of person who supports their partner's dreams instead of competing with them. But late at night, when I can't sleep, I still wonder what would have happened if I'd handled things differently. What if I'd packed lunches for Benny instead of picking fights when he worked late? What if I'd celebrated his success instead of resenting the time it took away from me? What if I'd been the kind of girlfriend who made his life easier instead of harder? I'll never know, because that chance is gone. Benny has found someone who gives him what I couldn't: unconditional support for his ambitions and understanding about what it takes to build something from nothing. And I'm left trying to learn from my mistakes so I don't repeat them with someone else. The hardest part is accepting that, when I threatened to leave, I wasn't trying to communicate. I was trying to manipulate. I was using the threat of losing me to control his behavior, to force him to choose me over everything else in his life. And when he finally took me seriously, when he finally accepted that maybe we weren't right for each other, I was shocked and devastated. But maybe he was right. Maybe I did deserve someone who could give me the kind of attention I was demanding. And maybe he deserved someone who could love him for who he was instead of constantly trying to change his priorities. I just never thought it would hurt this much to get what I said I wanted. So here I am, crying every night, learning that sometimes when you threaten to leave someone, they actually let you go. And sometimes, that's exactly what needed to happen, even when it breaks your heart into a million pieces. The worst part isn't that Benny moved on, it's that he moved on so easily. It's realizing that our relationship had become such a source of stress and conflict for him that losing me felt like relief instead of loss. It's understanding that while I was fighting for us, I was also fighting against the very things that made him who he was. I'm trying to forgive myself for not knowing better, for being young and selfish and scared of losing someone I loved. But I'm also trying to learn from this, to become someone who adds value to people's lives instead of demanding that they rearrange their entire existence around my needs. Maybe someday I'll find someone who can give me the attention I crave without sacrificing their own dreams and ambitions. Or maybe I'll learn to love someone so completely that supporting their success feels more important than demanding their constant attention. Either way, I know I'll never again use the threat of leaving as a weapon. Because sometimes people take you seriously, and sometimes that's exactly what they've been waiting for permission to do.